Edward Whitmore stood at the grand entrance of Ashworth Manor, the family estate he had inherited 3 years ago when he married Victoria. The sprawling Victorian mansion had been in Victoria's family for generations, but Edward had never felt completely at home within its walls. Today, however, something felt different. Victoria had left for her monthly charity meeting in London, and for the first time in months, Edward found himself truly alone in the massive house. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows as Edward wandered through the familiar corridors, his footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors. He had always been curious about certain areas of the house that seemed oddly configured, particularly the East Wing, where Victoria's private study was located. There were inconsistencies in the architecture that had puzzled him since moving in, but whenever he mentioned them to Victoria, she would quickly change the subject or dismiss his observations as imagination. As he walked past Victoria's study, Edward noticed something he had never seen before. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual since Victoria always kept it locked. She claimed it contained sensitive family documents and legal papers that required privacy. Edward had respected this boundary throughout their marriage, but today, curiosity got the better of him. He pushed the door open gently and stepped into the elegant room lined with mahogany bookshelves and antique furniture. Sunlight streaming through the bay window illuminated dust particles dancing in the air, giving the space an almost magical quality. Edward had only glimpsed this room briefly during his previous visits, and now he could truly appreciate its sophisticated decor and the careful arrangement of family portraits and heirlooms. However, as he examined the room more closely, something struck him as odd. According to his mental calculation of the house's layout, this study seemed significantly smaller than it should be, given the external dimensions of the East Wing. He had spent considerable time studying architecture during his university years, and his trained eye told him there was at least 15 to 20 feet of space unaccounted for. Edward began examining the walls more carefully, running his hands along the ornate wooden panels that covered the interior. Most of the panels felt solid and immovable, but when he reached the far corner behind Victoria's antique writing desk, he noticed something peculiar. One section of the paneling had a slightly different texture and seemed to give way slightly under pressure. His heart began to race as he moved the heavy desk aside, the wooden legs scraping softly against the hardwood floor. Behind the desk, the wall panel looked identical to all the others, but when Edward pressed against it, he could feel it shift slightly. He examined the edges more carefully and discovered what appeared to be a cleverly concealed seam running along the border of the panel. After several minutes of careful investigation, Edward found a small, almost invisible button hidden within the carved decorative molding. When he pressed it, he heard a soft clicking sound, and the panel swung inward like a door, revealing a narrow corridor beyond. Edward's breath caught in his throat. A secret passage in his own home, or rather, his wife's family home. The corridor beyond was dark, but he could see it extended several feet before turning to the right. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone's flashlight and stepped through the hidden doorway. The passage was narrow but well-constructed, with the same quality craftsmanship evident throughout the rest of the manor. The walls were lined with the same mahogany paneling, and the floor was covered with a rich burgundy carpet that muffled his footsteps. Edward moved slowly forward, his phone's light cutting through the darkness ahead. After about 10 feet, the corridor turned sharply to the right, just as he had observed from the entrance. As he rounded the corner, Edward saw a soft glow emanating from somewhere ahead. Someone had been here recently, or perhaps there were windows providing natural light. His pulse quickened as he realized he was about to discover what Victoria had been hiding from him all this time. The corridor opened into a spacious room that took Edward's breath away. Unlike the rest of the manor's traditional Victorian decor, this space was furnished in a completely different style. Modern furniture, contemporary artwork, and sophisticated lighting created an atmosphere that felt like stepping into another world entirely. But it wasn't just the unexpected decor that shocked Edward. The room was clearly being used as a private retreat or sanctuary. Fresh flowers sat in elegant vases, recent magazines were scattered across a sleek glass coffee table, and a cup of tea sat on a side table, still warm to the touch. Someone had been here very recently, possibly just before Victoria left for London. Edward's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. Why would Victoria create this elaborate secret room and never mention it to him? What purpose did it serve that required such secrecy? As he explored further, he began to notice personal items that deepened his confusion and growing concern. On a modern desk against the far wall, Edward spotted several framed photographs that made his blood run cold. The photos showed Victoria in intimate embraces with a man Edward didn't recognize, a handsome, well-dressed gentleman who appeared to be around Victoria's age. The photos were clearly recent, as Victoria was wearing outfits Edward recognized from the past few months. His hands trembling slightly, Edward picked up one of the photographs. In it, Victoria and the mysterious man were laughing together at what appeared to be an upscale restaurant, their hands intertwined across the table. The look in Victoria's eyes was one Edward hadn't seen directed toward himself in quite some time, genuine joy and deep affection. As he continued examining the room, Edward discovered more evidence of Victoria's secret life. A man's jacket hung on a hook near the entrance, expensive cologne sat on a shelf, and a second set of keys lay on the desk beside the photographs. It was clear that this wasn't just Victoria's private retreat. It was a space she shared with someone else. The realization hit Edward like a physical blow. His wife of 3 years had been living a double life, maintaining this secret room where she could meet with another man away from Edward's knowledge. The elaborate hidden passage, the careful concealment, the locked study door, it all made sense now. Victoria had been having an affair, and she had been conducting it right here in their own home. Edward sank into one of the modern chairs, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he had discovered. He thought about all the times Victoria had claimed to be at charity meetings, family obligations, or social events. How many of those occasions had she actually spent here, in this hidden room, with her secret lover? The betrayal felt overwhelming, but alongside the hurt came a burning anger. Not only had Victoria been unfaithful, but she had been incredibly calculated and deceptive about it. The secret room represented months or possibly years of planning and preparation. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a sustained, deliberate deception that had been carefully orchestrated to fool Edward completely. As Edward sat in the secret room, surrounded by evidence of his wife's betrayal, he knew that his life was about to change dramatically. The question now was what he would do with this devastating knowledge. Should he confront Victoria immediately? Should he investigate further to understand the full scope of her deception? Or should he consult with a lawyer before taking any action? One thing was certain. The marriage he thought he had been living was a complete fabrication, and the woman he believed he knew and loved had been playing a role designed to keep him in the dark about her true feelings and activities. The discovery of the secret room had revealed not just a hidden space, but a hidden life that would force Edward to question everything he thought he knew about his relationship and his future. Edward remained in the secret room for over an hour, carefully examining every detail and trying to piece together the timeline of Victoria's deception. The more he discovered, the more elaborate and calculated her betrayal appeared to be. Hidden in a small drawer of the modern desk, he found what appeared to be a detailed calendar marking Victoria's supposed charity meetings and social obligations. Many of these dates were marked with small hearts, and the initials MR. Edward assumed these must be the initials of Victoria's secret lover. As he studied the calendar more closely, he realized that the marked dates corresponded perfectly with times when Victoria had been away from home for extended periods. What she had told him were charitable obligations or family commitments were actually carefully planned rendezvous with another man. The depth of planning required for such an elaborate deception was staggering. Victoria hadn't simply stumbled into an affair. She had systematically created an entire false narrative about her activities while constructing a physical space where she could pursue her secret relationship. The hidden room represented months of construction and preparation, all done without Edward's knowledge despite his living in the same house. Edward discovered a small jewelry box tucked away on a shelf, and when he opened it, his anger intensified. Inside were several pieces of expensive jewelry that he had never seen Victoria wear, clearly gifts from her lover. The pieces were exquisite and obviously costly, suggesting that MR was a man of considerable means. One piece in particular caught Edward's attention, an elegant diamond bracelet with an engraving that read, "To my darling V, forever yours, Marcus." Marcus. Now Edward had a name to go with the initials. Marcus R. But who was this man? And how had Victoria met him? Edward's mind raced through possibilities. Was Marcus someone from Victoria's past who had recently re-entered her life? Or was he a new acquaintance who had somehow managed to seduce Victoria away from her marriage? As Edward continued his investigation, he found a small notebook hidden behind some books on a floating shelf. The notebook contained what appeared to be Victoria's private thoughts and feelings about her relationship with Marcus. Reading his wife's intimate reflections felt like a violation, but Edward felt justified given the circumstances of his discovery. The notebook entries revealed a complex emotional landscape that shocked Edward. Victoria wrote about feeling trapped and unfulfilled in her marriage to Edward, describing their relationship as comfortable but passionless. She wrote about meeting Marcus at a gallery opening 6 months ago and being immediately drawn to his intelligence and charm. According to her entries, Marcus was a successful art dealer who traveled frequently between London and Paris. What disturbed Edward most were Victoria's reflections on their marriage. She wrote about feeling guilty for deceiving Edward, whom she described as a good man who deserves better, but she also wrote about feeling unable to end their marriage due to family expectations and financial complications. Victoria came from a wealthy family with strong traditional values, and divorce was apparently seen as unacceptable within her social circle. The notebook revealed that Victoria had been struggling with her feelings for months before finally deciding to pursue the relationship with Marcus while maintaining her marriage to Edward. She had convinced herself that this arrangement was preferable to the pain and scandal that would result from leaving Edward openly. In her mind, she was protecting everyone involved by conducting her affair discreetly. Reading his wife's private thoughts was agonizing for Edward, but it also provided him with valuable insights into Victoria's mindset and motivations. She wasn't a cruel or heartless person. She was someone who had found herself in a situation she felt unable to handle honestly, and had chosen what she believed to be the path of least harm. Unfortunately, her solution involved massive deception and betrayal that had been eating away at the foundation of their marriage. Edward discovered additional evidence of the affair in the form of love letters that Marcus had written to Victoria. The letters were eloquent and passionate, expressing deep feelings and future plans that included traveling together once Victoria could resolve her current situation. Marcus clearly believed that Victoria would eventually leave Edward to be with him, and he was growing impatient with the secrecy and delay. One letter in particular caught Edward's attention. In it, Marcus wrote about his frustration with having to hide their relationship and urged Victoria to be honest with Edward about her feelings. He wrote, "Darling Victoria, I understand your concerns about family and social expectations, but we cannot continue living this lie indefinitely. Edward deserves to know the truth, and we deserve to be together openly. I love you too much to remain a secret forever." The irony was not lost on Edward that Victoria's lover was actually encouraging her to be honest about their relationship, while Victoria had chosen to maintain the deception. This suggested that the continued secrecy was primarily Victoria's decision rather than something that Marcus had demanded or encouraged. As Edward read through more of the correspondence, he began to develop a clearer picture of the dynamics between Victoria and Marcus. Their relationship appeared to be genuinely loving and committed rather than simply a casual affair. Marcus wrote about wanting to build a future with Victoria, and Victoria's notebook entries described deep emotional and intellectual connection with him that she felt was missing from her marriage to Edward. This realization was perhaps even more painful than discovering a purely physical affair would have been. Victoria hadn't simply made a mistake or given in to momentary temptation. She had found someone she believed to be her true romantic match and had chosen to pursue that relationship while keeping Edward in the dark about her true feelings. Edward found himself facing a complex emotional situation. On one hand, he was furious about the deception and betrayal. Victoria had systematically lied to him for months while carrying on an affair in their own home. On the other hand, the evidence suggested that Victoria genuinely cared about both men and was struggling with an impossible situation rather than acting out of malice or selfishness. The discovery also forced Edward to examine his own marriage more honestly. Had he been blind to signs that Victoria was unhappy? Looking back, he could remember times when Victoria had seemed distant or distracted, but he had attributed these moments to stress from her charity work or family obligations. Had she tried to communicate her dissatisfaction in ways that he had failed to recognize or address? Edward realized that while Victoria's deception was inexcusable, their marriage might have been in trouble long before Marcus entered the picture. Perhaps Victoria's affair was a symptom of deeper problems in their relationship rather than the cause of their difficulties. As the afternoon wore on, Edward heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Victoria was returning from London earlier than expected. His heart began to pound as he realized he needed to decide immediately how to handle this situation. Should he confront her right away with what he had discovered? Should he pretend everything was normal while he decided on his next steps? Or should he leave the house entirely to avoid an immediate confrontation? Edward quickly but carefully returned everything in the secret room to exactly the way he had found it. He made sure no evidence remained of his presence, then made his way back through the hidden corridor to Victoria's study. After ensuring that the secret panel was properly closed and that Victoria's desk was returned to its original position, Edward left the study and closed the door behind him. He could hear Victoria's heels clicking on the marble floor as she entered the house. In a few moments, she would likely come looking for him, and he would have to face her knowing what he now knew about her secret life. The next few hours would determine the future of their marriage and both of their lives. Edward took a deep breath and prepared to greet his wife, knowing that nothing would ever be the same between them again. The secret room had revealed more than just a hidden space. It had exposed the fundamental dishonesty at the heart of their relationship and forced Edward to confront the reality that the woman he had married was not the person he thought she was. Edward barely had time to compose himself before Victoria appeared in the main hallway, her elegant coat still draped over her arm, and her cheeks flushed from the crisp autumn air. She looked beautiful as always, but now Edward saw her differently. Every gesture, every expression seemed calculated and potentially deceptive. Where once he had seen his loving wife, he now saw a woman capable of extraordinary duplicity. "Hello, darling," Victoria said with a warm smile, approaching to kiss his cheek as she always did when returning home. The charity meeting ended earlier than expected. Lady Pemberton had to leave for a family emergency, so we decided to postpone the budget discussion until next week. Edward accepted her kiss while his mind raced. Was this story true, or was it another carefully constructed lie designed to cover a meeting with Marcus? The ease with which Victoria delivered the explanation, complete with specific details about Lady Pemberton, demonstrated the level of skill she had developed in creating believable cover stories. "How was your day?" Victoria continued, hanging her coat in the entrance closet. "I hope you didn't find the house too quiet without me here. You know how these old manor houses can feel rather haunting when you're all alone." The irony of her comment wasn't lost on Edward. The house did indeed hold secrets and surprises, but not the kind Victoria was referring to. "It was fine," Edward managed to reply, his voice sounding more normal than he had expected. "I spent some time reading and just enjoying the quiet." Victoria nodded and began walking toward the kitchen. "I thought I might prepare something special for dinner tonight. I picked up some lovely ingredients at that gourmet market near the charity office. Perhaps some salmon with lemon herbs and a nice bottle of wine." Edward followed her, observing her behavior carefully. Victoria seemed genuinely relaxed and happy, showing no signs of guilt or anxiety that might indicate she suspected he had discovered anything. Her demeanor was that of a woman who believed her secrets were still safe, which somehow made the situation even more painful for Edward. As Victoria began preparing dinner, chatting about her supposed charity meeting and various social obligations for the coming week, Edward found himself studying her with new eyes. She moved through their kitchen with practiced ease, discussing mundane domestic matters while carrying on an elaborate secret life. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. "I was thinking," Victoria said as she seasoned the salmon, "perhaps we should plan a little getaway soon. It's been so long since we've had quality time together, just the two of us. Maybe a long weekend in the Cotswolds." The suggestion struck Edward as particularly cruel, though he realized Victoria probably meant it sincerely. From her perspective, she was trying to maintain their marriage while pursuing her affair, believing she could somehow preserve both relationships without destroying either. The weekend getaway was likely her attempt to assuage her guilt while keeping Edward satisfied and unsuspecting. "That sounds nice," Edward replied, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. He wondered if Victoria would use such a weekend as an opportunity to end their marriage, or if she would continue trying to balance both relationships indefinitely. During dinner, Victoria was more attentive and affectionate than she had been in months. She asked about his work, shared amusing anecdotes from her supposed charity meeting, and seemed genuinely interested in reconnecting with him. Under normal circumstances, Edward would have been thrilled by this renewed attention from his wife. Now, however, every gesture felt like a manipulation designed to maintain her deception. "You seem a bit quiet tonight," Victoria observed as they finished their meal. "Is everything all right? You're not coming down with something, are you?" Edward realized he needed to be more careful about concealing his emotional state. Just tired, I think. I didn't sleep well last night. This was actually true. He had been restless the night before, though he couldn't have imagined the real reason for his insomnia would soon become clear. After dinner, Victoria suggested they watch a movie together, something they hadn't done in several weeks. She curled up beside Edward on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched a romantic comedy that felt absurdly inappropriate given the circumstances. Edward found himself analyzing every moment of physical contact, wondering if Victoria was thinking about Marcus while touching him. The most disturbing aspect of the evening was how normal and pleasant it felt. If Edward hadn't discovered the secret room, he would have considered this one of their better evenings together in quite some time. Victoria was engaged, affectionate, and seemingly happy to be spending time with him. The realization that this could all be an elaborate performance designed to maintain her cover story was emotionally devastating. As the movie ended, Victoria yawned and stretched. I think I'll turn in early tonight. Lady Pemberton wants to meet for brunch tomorrow to discuss the postponed budget items, so I'll need to be up early to review the documents. Another perfectly plausible excuse for leaving the house. Edward wondered if Victoria actually had any charity obligations or if they were all fabrications designed to facilitate her affair. Will you be gone long? He asked, trying to sound casually interested rather than suspicious. Probably most of the morning and early afternoon, Victoria replied. You know how these charity ladies love to talk. After brunch, Lady Pemberton wants to visit that new boutique gallery downtown. She's thinking of commissioning a piece for the charity auction. A gallery. Edward's blood ran cold as he remembered that Victoria had met Marcus at a gallery opening. Was this supposed gallery visit actually a plan to meet with Marcus? Or was Edward now reading sinister meanings into every innocent activity? The next morning, Edward woke to find Victoria already up and preparing for her supposed charity brunch. She was dressed elegantly but not provocatively, and her behavior seemed perfectly normal. She kissed Edward goodbye and reminded him that she had left some leftover salmon in the refrigerator for his lunch. After Victoria left, Edward waited 30 minutes to ensure she wouldn't return for anything forgotten, then made his way back to the secret room. He had spent the night thinking about what he had discovered and had developed a plan to gather more information before deciding how to proceed. This time, Edward brought a small camera to photograph the evidence he had found. He carefully documented the photographs of Victoria and Marcus, the love letters, Victoria's notebook entries, and the jewelry. He wanted to ensure he had proof of everything in case Victoria tried to deny the affair or claim the evidence was fabricated. As Edward photographed Marcus's letters, he paid more attention to the letterhead and return address. Marcus Richardson operated an art gallery called Richardson Fine Arts in an upscale area of London. The gallery's website, which Edward accessed on his phone, showed that Marcus was indeed a successful and well-respected art dealer who specialized in contemporary European paintings. Marcus's professional biography revealed that he was 42 years old, educated at Cambridge, and had spent several years working for prestigious galleries in Paris before opening his own establishment in London. He was described as a passionate advocate for emerging artists and had been featured in several art publications for his innovative exhibitions and keen eye for talent. The more Edward learned about Marcus, the more he understood Victoria's attraction to him. Marcus appeared to be intelligent, successful, sophisticated, and genuinely passionate about his work. In many ways, he represented everything that Edward felt he was not: worldly, artistic, and dynamic. Edward also discovered that Marcus had never been married, though he had been in several long-term relationships with women in the art world. There was no indication that he had a reputation as someone who pursued married women or broke up relationships. This suggested that his involvement with Victoria was likely motivated by genuine feelings rather than a pattern of predatory behavior. As Edward continued his investigation, he found additional evidence of the affair's progression. Hidden in the back of Victoria's notebook were receipts from expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and exclusive events that Victoria and Marcus had attended together. The receipts painted a picture of a sophisticated courtship that had been ongoing for several months. Most disturbing was a receipt from a jewelry store for the diamond bracelet Edward had found in the jewelry box. The purchase date was just 3 weeks ago, indicating that the affair was not only ongoing but intensifying. Marcus was continuing to invest emotionally and financially in his relationship with Victoria, clearly believing that their future together was assured. Edward also found hotel receipts that revealed Victoria and Marcus had spent several nights together at a luxury hotel in London. The dates corresponded with times when Victoria had told Edward she was attending charity conferences or visiting family members. The systematic nature of her deceptions was breathtaking in its scope and calculation. As Edward documented everything, he felt his anger building to dangerous levels. Victoria hadn't simply made a mistake or fallen into temptation. She had constructed an elaborate alternate life that required constant lies and manipulation. Every loving gesture, every intimate moment, every future plan they had discussed had been tainted by her secret relationship with another man. The evidence also revealed that Victoria and Marcus were making plans for a future together. In one of Marcus's more recent letters, he wrote about a property he was considering purchasing in France where they could spend time together away from London society. He was clearly planning a life that included Victoria as his permanent partner rather than his secret lover. Edward realized that he was probably witnessing the final stages of his marriage, whether he chose to act on his discovery or not. Victoria appeared to be preparing to leave him for Marcus, but she was taking her time to arrange the transition in a way that would minimize scandal and social complications. The question now was whether Edward should force the issue by confronting Victoria immediately or whether he should wait to see how the situation developed naturally. Either choice would have profound consequences for all three people involved, and Edward knew he needed to think carefully about his next move. Edward spent the following days in a state of emotional turmoil, carefully maintaining his normal routine while internally struggling with the weight of his discovery. Every interaction with Victoria felt like a performance, and he found himself constantly analyzing her words and actions for additional clues about her deception. The psychological strain of pretending everything was normal while knowing the truth about her affair was becoming unbearable. 3 days after his initial discovery, Edward made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Victoria directly, he decided to gather more concrete evidence by following her during one of her supposed charity meetings. He needed to see the affair with his own eyes before taking any irreversible action. Victoria announced that she would be attending an all-day charity planning session at Lady Pemberton's estate, claiming she wouldn't return until late evening. Edward waited until she left, then drove his car to a discreet location where he could observe the main road leading away from their estate. As he suspected, Victoria's car turned toward London rather than toward Lady Pemberton's property in the opposite direction. Edward followed at a safe distance, his heart pounding as the reality of the situation became undeniable. Victoria drove directly into London's art district, eventually parking near Richardson Fine Arts. Edward watched from across the street as Victoria entered the gallery, and moments later, Marcus emerged from the back office to greet her with an embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Seeing his wife in another man's arms was devastating, but Edward forced himself to continue observing. Victoria and Marcus spent several minutes talking in the gallery before Marcus locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. They then disappeared into the back areas of the gallery, presumably to the private apartment or office space where they could be alone together. Edward sat in his car for over an hour, grappling with the emotional impact of witnessing his wife's betrayal firsthand. All the evidence he had gathered in the secret room was now confirmed by direct observation. Victoria was indeed having a passionate affair with Marcus Richardson, and she was doing so during times when she had explicitly told Edward she would be elsewhere. Unable to bear watching any longer, Edward drove home and spent the afternoon trying to decide on his course of action. He could no longer pretend that he didn't know about the affair, but he still wasn't certain how to proceed. Should he hire a private investigator to gather additional evidence for a potential divorce proceeding? Should he consult with a lawyer immediately? Or should he finally confront Victoria directly and demand an explanation? That evening, Victoria returned home at nearly 10 o'clock, apologizing profusely for the late hour and explaining that the charity meeting had run much longer than expected. She looked radiant and happy, clearly energized by her time with Marcus, though she tried to appear tired from her supposed long day of charitable work. "I'm so sorry, darling," Victoria said as she hung up her coat. Lady Pemberton had so many ideas for the spring fundraiser, and then we got completely sidetracked discussing the new museum exhibition. You know how she gets when she's passionate about something. Edward nodded and made appropriate responses, but internally he was seething. Victoria's ability to lie so smoothly and convincingly was both impressive and terrifying. She had clearly perfected the art of deception to a degree that made Edward question everything she had ever told him about anything. The next morning, Edward made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of confronting Victoria or consulting with lawyers, he decided to visit Marcus Richardson's gallery directly. He needed to understand the man who had stolen his wife's affections, and he wanted to gauge whether Marcus was aware that Edward knew about the affair. Edward dressed carefully in his best business attire and drove to Richardson Fine Arts. The gallery was located in an elegant converted townhouse in one of London's most prestigious art districts. The exterior was tastefully understated, with large windows displaying carefully curated contemporary paintings that immediately conveyed sophistication and artistic credibility. When Edward entered the gallery, Marcus was discussing a large abstract painting with an elderly couple who appeared to be serious collectors. Marcus was exactly as Edward had expected based on Victoria's descriptions and the photographs he had seen: tall, distinguished, well-dressed, and possessing the kind of confident charm that would naturally appeal to women like Victoria. Edward browsed the gallery quietly, observing Marcus as he interacted with his clients. Marcus was clearly knowledgeable about art and passionate about his work, explaining the techniques and inspiration behind various pieces with genuine enthusiasm. He had the kind of intellectual confidence and cultural sophistication that Edward knew Victoria found attractive. After the couple left with promises to return the following week, Marcus approached Edward with a professional smile. "Good afternoon. I'm Marcus Richardson, the gallery owner. Is there anything particular you're interested in, or are you just browsing today?" Edward felt a surge of conflicting emotions as he faced his wife's lover directly. Marcus seemed genuinely friendly and showed no signs of recognizing Edward or feeling uncomfortable about their meeting. This suggested that Victoria had been careful not to share personal details about her marriage with Marcus, or that Marcus was an exceptionally skilled actor. "Just browsing, thank you," Edward replied, maintaining his composure despite the surreal nature of the situation. "I'm particularly interested in contemporary landscapes. Do you have anything in that category?" Marcus's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Absolutely. I have some wonderful pieces by emerging British artists who specialize in landscape work. Let me show you some of my favorites." For the next 30 minutes, Marcus guided Edward through the gallery, discussing various artists and their techniques with obvious passion and expertise. Edward found himself genuinely impressed by Marcus's knowledge and his ability to make art accessible and interesting even to someone without extensive background in the subject. The most disturbing aspect of the encounter was that Edward actually liked Marcus. Under different circumstances, they might have become friends. Marcus was intelligent, cultured, and genuinely passionate about his work. He wasn't the stereotypical predatory older man that Edward had hoped to find. He was simply a successful, attractive man who had fallen in love with Edward's wife. "Are you married?" Marcus asked conversationally as they discussed a particularly striking landscape painting. "I always find that couples have very different tastes in art, and it can be quite a challenge to find pieces that appeal to both partners." The irony of the question was staggering, but Edward managed to respond calmly. "Yes, I am. My wife has excellent taste in art, actually. She's quite passionate about it." "How wonderful," Marcus replied with genuine warmth. There's nothing quite like sharing cultural interests with someone you love. Art becomes so much more meaningful when you can experience it with a partner who truly understands and appreciates it. Edward realized that Marcus was probably thinking about Victoria as he spoke, unaware that he was discussing the very woman whose marriage he was destroying. The conversation felt like something from a dark comedy, except that the consequences were all too real and painful. As Edward prepared to leave the gallery, Marcus handed him a business card and invited him to attend the opening of a new exhibition the following week. "It's going to be a wonderful show featuring emerging European artists. I think you'd really enjoy it, and it might be something you could attend with your wife." Edward accepted the invitation politely, knowing he would never attend, but curious about whether Victoria would mention the exhibition. If she did, it would provide additional confirmation of how deeply involved she was in Marcus's professional life as well as his personal life. Driving home from the gallery, Edward felt even more confused about his situation than before. Meeting Marcus had humanized him in a way that made the affair more complex emotionally. This wasn't a case of a predatory man taking advantage of an unhappy wife. It appeared to be a genuine love triangle involving three decent people who had found themselves in an impossible situation. Edward also realized that Marcus seemed to genuinely care about Victoria and wasn't simply using her for casual entertainment. His references to sharing cultural experiences with a partner suggested that he was thinking about a serious, long-term relationship with Victoria rather than a temporary affair. That evening, Victoria mentioned that she had heard about an interesting new art exhibition opening soon at a gallery in London. She suggested that she and Edward might attend together if he was interested. Edward recognized this as the same exhibition Marcus had invited him to, confirming that Victoria was indeed deeply integrated into Marcus's professional world. "Where did you hear about this exhibition?" Edward asked, testing to see how Victoria would handle the question. "Oh, Lady Pemberton mentioned it," Victoria replied smoothly. "Apparently one of her friends is quite involved in the London art scene and recommended it highly. I thought it might be something different for us to do together." Another perfectly crafted lie delivered without hesitation. Edward marveled at Victoria's ability to weave her deception so seamlessly into their normal conversations. She was using her relationship with Marcus to enhance her relationship with Edward, suggesting cultural activities that would make her appear more interesting and sophisticated while actually drawing from experiences she was sharing with her lover. That night, as Victoria slept peacefully beside him, Edward stared at the ceiling and tried to decide what to do with the knowledge he had gained. He now understood that he was dealing with a complex emotional situation rather than a simple case of marital betrayal. Victoria was genuinely torn between two men she cared about. Marcus was unknowingly involved in breaking up a marriage, and Edward was faced with the impossible task of fighting for a wife who had already given her heart to someone else. The discovery of the secret room had been just the beginning of a much larger and more complicated truth about his marriage, his wife, and himself. Edward knew that whatever he decided to do next would change all of their lives forever, and he was no longer certain what outcome he actually wanted to achieve. Edward spent the following week in a state of internal conflict, knowing he could no longer postpone making a decision about his marriage. The weight of carrying Victoria's secret had become unbearable, and he could see that his emotional distress was beginning to affect his work and daily interactions. He had to act, but he still wasn't certain what action would be best for everyone involved. The decision was ultimately made for him when Edward returned home unexpectedly early from a business meeting that had been canceled at the last minute. As he entered the house through the back entrance, he could hear voices coming from the direction of Victoria's study. One voice was clearly Victoria's, but the other was unmistakably male and unfamiliar. Edward's heart began to race as he realized that Victoria had brought Marcus to their home while she believed Edward would be away all afternoon. The audacity of conducting their affair in the family manner, in the secret room that Victoria had constructed specifically for this purpose, felt like the ultimate betrayal. Moving quietly through the house, Edward could hear the voices more clearly as he approached the east wing. Victoria and Marcus were indeed in the secret room, and their conversation revealed that they were making concrete plans for their future together. Edward positioned himself near Victoria's study, where he could hear through the hidden panel without being detected. "I can't continue living this double life much longer," Victoria was saying, her voice filled with emotion. "Every day feels like a betrayal of everyone I care about. Edward, you, and myself. I need to make a decision soon about what I want my life to look like." "I understand completely, darling," Marcus replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I've been patient because I know how difficult this situation is for you. But I need to know that we're moving toward a future together. I love you too much to remain a secret indefinitely." "I know, and I love you for being so understanding," Victoria continued. "I've been thinking about how to approach Edward. He's a good man who doesn't deserve to be deceived like this. I need to be honest with him about my feelings, even though it will hurt him terribly." Edward felt a complex mix of emotions as he listened to their conversation. On one hand, he was devastated to hear his wife discussing leaving him for another man. On the other hand, he was somewhat relieved to hear that Victoria felt guilty about her deception and was planning to end it honestly rather than continuing the affair indefinitely. "When are you thinking of telling him?" Marcus asked. "Soon," Victoria replied. "Perhaps after the charity gala next weekend. I want to get through that obligation first, and then I'll find the right moment to have an honest conversation with Edward about our marriage." "And what will you tell him about us?" Marcus pressed gently. "The truth," Victoria said firmly, "that I've fallen in love with someone else, and that I want to end our marriage. I won't tell him about this room or about how long our relationship has been going on. There's no need to hurt him more than necessary." Edward listened as they continued to discuss the practical aspects of Victoria leaving their marriage. They talked about living arrangements, social complications, and how to minimize the impact on both families. Their conversation revealed that they had been planning this transition for several weeks, and that Victoria had already consulted with lawyers about divorce proceedings. The most painful aspect of their conversation was hearing how much Victoria and Marcus clearly loved each other. Their discussion wasn't about ending an affair to return to their respective lives. It was about two people planning a genuine future together. Victoria spoke about Marcus with a passion and excitement that Edward realized she had never expressed about their own relationship, even in their early days together. As Edward continued listening, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of continuing to eavesdrop or retreating to avoid confrontation, he decided to confront them immediately and directly. The charade had gone on long enough, and everyone involved deserved to deal with the situation honestly rather than continuing to live with deception and secrets. Edward walked into Victoria's study and pressed the hidden button that opened the secret panel. The mechanical sound of the door opening caused immediate silence from within the hidden room. Edward stepped through the concealed entrance and found Victoria and Marcus sitting close together on the modern sofa, both looking shocked and horrified by his unexpected appearance. "Hello, Victoria." "Marcus," Edward said calmly, though his heart was pounding. "I think it's time we all had an honest conversation." Victoria's face went completely white, and her hands began to tremble. "Edward, how did you?" "I discovered your secret room several days ago," Edward replied, maintaining his composure despite the emotional intensity of the situation. "I've been waiting for you to find the courage to tell me the truth about your relationship, but I can't wait any longer." Marcus stood up slowly, his face a mixture of embarrassment and concern. "Mr. Whitmore, I want you to know that I never intended for this situation to develop the way it has. I care deeply about Victoria, and I would never have pursued a relationship with her if I had believed her marriage was happy and healthy." Edward looked at Marcus with a mixture of anger and grudging respect. Even in this incredibly awkward situation, Marcus was trying to be honorable and honest. "I appreciate your directness, Mr. Richardson, and you're right that our marriage hasn't been as strong as it should have been. But that doesn't excuse the deception and betrayal that's been going on." Victoria finally found her voice, though she was clearly struggling to maintain her composure. "Edward, I am so sorry. You're right that I should have been honest with you from the beginning. I never meant for things to go this far without telling you the truth." "But they did go this far," Edward replied, his voice beginning to show the strain of his emotions. "For months, you've been lying to me about where you go, what you do, and how you feel. You've constructed an entire secret life while pretending to be my devoted wife." Tears began to flow down Victoria's cheeks as the weight of her deception finally caught up with her. "I know I've handled this terribly. I was afraid of hurting you, and I was afraid of the social complications, and I convinced myself that I could find a way to manage the situation without destroying anyone's life." "Except you were destroying my life," Edward said, his anger finally beginning to show. "Every day I lived with lies. Every conversation we had that was based on deception, every plan we made for the future that you knew you weren't committed to, all of that was destroying the life I thought we had together." Marcus stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable but determined to accept responsibility for his role in the situation. "Mr. Whitmore, I want you to know that I am fully prepared to take responsibility for my part in this situation. I love Victoria, and I want to build a life with her, but not at the expense of causing you unnecessary pain or humiliation." Edward looked at both of them, seeing two people who genuinely cared about each other and who were genuinely sorry about the pain they had caused him. The situation was heartbreaking for everyone involved, but Edward realized that continuing to be angry wouldn't change the fundamental reality that his wife loved another man. "I need you both to understand something," Edward said after a long pause. "This isn't just about the affair. It's about the systematic deception that made it possible. Victoria, if you had come to me months ago and told me honestly that you were unhappy in our marriage and that you had met someone else, we could have handled this situation with dignity and respect for everyone involved." Victoria nodded through her tears. "You're absolutely right. I took the coward's way out, and I made everything worse by trying to avoid difficult conversations and painful decisions. The question now," Edward continued, "is what we do going forward. I assume you're planning to leave our marriage to be with Marcus?" Victoria looked at Marcus, then back at Edward. "Yes, I am. I should have told you weeks ago, but I was planning to ask for a divorce after the charity gala next weekend." Edward nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief that the truth was finally out in the open. "Then, I suggest we handle this honestly from this point forward. Victoria, you can move out immediately if you want to. I won't contest the divorce, and I'll work with your lawyers to make the process as smooth as possible. Both Victoria and Marcus looked surprised by Edward's measured response. They had clearly expected more anger and drama. I'm not saying I'm not hurt and angry, Edward continued. But I can see that you two genuinely love each other, and I'd rather end our marriage with some dignity intact than drag this out in a way that hurts everyone even more. Over the following hours, the three of them had the most honest conversation any of them had experienced in months. Victoria apologized repeatedly for her deception and explained how she had convinced herself that maintaining both relationships was preferable to the pain of ending either one. Marcus expressed his genuine regret about the circumstances while affirming his commitment to Victoria and their future together. Edward found himself feeling surprisingly grateful that the truth was finally out in the open. The constant stress of pretending everything was normal while knowing about Victoria's deception had been taking a severe toll on his mental health and overall well-being. In the weeks that followed, Victoria moved out of Ashworth Manor to live with Marcus in London. Their divorce proceedings were handled quietly and efficiently, with both parties working to minimize social drama and public attention. Edward kept the manor and most of their shared assets, while Victoria took her personal belongings and family heirlooms. The hardest part for Edward was explaining the situation to friends and family members, many of whom were shocked by what they perceived as a sudden end to a happy marriage. Edward chose to tell people simply that he and Victoria had grown apart and decided to divorce amicably, without providing details about the affair or the secret room. 6 months after discovering Victoria's secret, Edward found himself living alone in the grand estate that had never quite felt like home. He had the secret room sealed and converted Victoria's former study into a library, removing all traces of the deception that had defined the final months of his marriage. Although the discovery of Victoria's secret room had destroyed his marriage, Edward ultimately felt that it had also freed him from a relationship that was built on fundamental dishonesty. He began to rebuild his life with a clearer understanding of what he wanted from future relationships and a determination to never again accept deception in place of authentic emotional connection. Victoria and Marcus married a year later in a small, private ceremony in France. They appeared to be genuinely happy together, and Edward wished them well despite everything that had happened. The secret room at Ashworth Manor was gone, but the lessons it had taught about honesty, trust, and the devastating consequences of deception would stay with Edward for the rest of his life.